All right. Hello, everybody. We did it, Magda. We did it.
It's working.
It's working. All right. So for those that are tuning in, obviously we're making a little fun joke because when Magdalena was trying to stream with us a couple of weeks ago, there seemed to be some big, huge issue, power outage and everything. So all the services that we use for streaming went down. So we have rescheduled, obviously, Magda for today. So I appreciate you all joining us. And for those that tried to come a couple weeks ago, you can join us now again. And maybe hopefully new people also joining in with us. So
Hello.
we're very excited to have Magdalena here with us. She's a prolific artist. And, it's been years now, I think 12 years since I've known her and watching her work for me. It's just been amazing watching all the stuff that she does. I'm very excited for the stream. It's going to be a lot of fun. You guys definitely want to get buckled up, get your notepad ready. She's going to show some great techniques, the way that she uses ZBrush to do her pieces. So if you've ever followed her work or looked at her work, this is definitely a stream for you, and get ready for the techniques that she uses. I think it's going to be awesome for you all to see. So Magda, I'm going to hand it off to you, but for everybody that's tuning in, I will be monitoring the questions that you guys have coming through in your chat. So you fire away any questions in there, and I will find time to ask Magdalena some questions that you guys might be asking to her.
Yeah, definitely.
So by all means,
just throw them in.
Yep. Yeah. And then I will answer what I can in text form as well, whenever I can. But I'll find from time to time. I want to make sure Magda gets in a rhythm and lets her do what she needs to do presentation-wise too, and we'll find time to ask questions for you all. So without further ado, everybody, I'd like to introduce Magdalena Dadela. So Magda, I'll let you take it away now and run the show.
Thank you very much, Paul. Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm happy to we finally made it this time. My name is Magdalena Dadela. For those of you who do not know my work, you can see it on the screen right now. This is some of the personal work that I do. In daytime, I work at Frame Store in Montreal. I've worked on many projects before, games and films, like Assassin's Creed, a lot of Assassin's Creed games, and a Warcraft movie, and recently a very bad movie, Artemis Fowl, but it was still fun to work on. So this is some of the stuff that I get most often asked about. Sorry. And people who follow me on Twitter and Instagram know that I like to do faces, and facial expressions are my passion. And I've decided that for this stream I'm going to concentrate on that. The two questions that I get asked most are, what do you think about when you're sculpting faces, and how do you analyze facial expressions? So I'll try to answer those. I'm going to sculpt a face, not from scratch because we only have 2 hours, but I'll try to sculpt a face to a good enough level to make an expression as well, and hopefully talk you through everything that I've learned about sculpting faces till now. And I hope some of you will profit from it and maybe learn something new. Maybe you'll have a wow moment, which I had a lot of during my career, even like 10 years into sculpting faces. There were a few moments that I was completely blown away by things that I didn't realize. So I wanted to just quickly mention some inspiration and where my passion for facial expressions comes from, I think, and for faces and textures. And I grew up with these two artists especially, Vasily Surikov, who's a Russian painter, and Anthony van Dyck, who was a Dutch painter. And Van Dyck is very well known for portraits, so I always stared at the faces and the grace of his portraits. I think they're very elegant. And this portrait of Charles I was always my favorite. And when I was a kid, I used to stare at it for hours and try to draw it. And Surikov, for me, is amazing storyteller, and the faces in his in his paintings is what I was obsessed with. Like, you can zoom in very close and see amazing expressions in the backgrounds. and these toothless guys, and also the textures on the clothing and on his paintings is something that I think driven by for many years. I like painted this lady sitting here, and I remember painting it in acrylics and being obsessed with these characters. So I think this is where my obsession comes from, long into the past when I was a kid. And then these days my main inspirations are these three sculptors in particular. Everyone who follows me on Twitter knows that I'm obsessed with Pietro Canonica. I think the grace and the elegance of his work is just astounding. I'm in love with it. And if you ever go to Rome and go to visit the Villa Borghese to see all the amazing Berninis, just definitely take a walk down the path in the garden, and there is the Pietro Canonica Museum, which is huge and full of his sculptures, because it used to be his workshop. So everything is there, and I think they're beautiful. Alfred Gilbert, another one whom I like especially for his use of materials and different textures in his work, and Jean-Baptiste Carpeau, who's amazing again at faces and facial expressions. So I think this rundown of the references and the artists that inspire me, I think gives you an idea of why I do what I do with my personal work. I'm going to, Paul, you can see my screen, right? My ZBrush?
Yep, you're all good. Everything's there.
Awesome. So I'm going to start from this, which I prepared earlier. I usually start from a head which is in ZBrush by default, which is this one, which is the demo anime head, which basically has all the landmarks there, just that the proportions are not quite human, but already has like nice little ears and the shape of the head, so I don't have to start from a sphere. I can start from a sphere sometimes too, if I feel like it. So I just basically turn this head into this simple shape, so we don't have to start from scratch. And before I start sculpting, I wanted to show you guys my setup and the UI, so you know what I work with. I'm not great with like customizing stuff. I usually work with default programs with every software that I work with, so I don't have any magic buttons set up. I do have a few things on the UI that I always put there. So the light is the most important. I like to use the light with the basic material just to be able to move it around from time to time to see the form properly. I also have the basic material tool, which I modified slightly. I just changed the specularity of it a little bit. So here in the modifiers, I just changed the specular curve so it's not so sharp, just slightly broader spec, and that's it. I have a flat color, which every time you work with layers, sometimes you fill things with the material by accident or something, so I usually use the flat color to quickly clear that, so it's always there. And then I have a downloaded material, which, to be quite honest, I have no idea where it came from. I have like a whole library of materials that I've collected over the years, and I think this one might be the Pixologic, the Nomonology, I think it was called, a long time ago. So I can share it if you want it. Yeah, and apart from that, I have my brushes, the 4 brushes that I use most of the time at the very bottom. So these are the brushes that come with ZBrush, but I sort of modify them a little bit, so they have the word mine. So I have no doubt that these are mine versions of them. The clay tubes is my favorite clay brush, and the brush that I'll be using most during this demo, probably. And the clay tubes brush, the way I modify it is I go to the stroke palette and just in the modifiers just change the roll to 5. I think by default it's 1. So that's the only thing I do with it, and I tone down the intensity slightly. So it doesn't have the stepping when I'm doing a stroke. It's like smoother stroke. Because by default I think it's like when you go to clay build up brush. Whoa, why am I pressing my V? Okay, something is wrong with my hotkeys. Okay, now it's working. So usually it has this sort of stepping effect, which I personally don't like, so I prefer to have it smooth. That's the only modification I did on it. Then I have a sharp brush, which is basically, I stole the alpha from DAM standard, but with the DAM standard I'm not too keen on the little pinching effect that it has. So I just took a regular standard brush and applied this alpha to it and changed the stroke again, the roll to 5, so I have it smoother, and that's it. And that brush I like to use a lot to cut in lines, usually with a lower intensity. So you see me use that a lot as well. The move topological, I use it all the time for moving. It's my favorite. I prefer it over the regular move brush. And just the regular standard brush, which I only modify again the roll on it, and also the lazy mouse settings, which by default I think lazy smooth and lazy radius are completely turned down, and I like to just turn them up a little bit to what they used to be in the old version of ZBrush. I remember at one point they changed, so, and I just remembered the settings and just kept changing them back. So yeah, that's so much for the brushes, and those are the brushes that I'll be using. Otherwise, I'll be working with Sculptress Pro. That's my favorite way to start working when I'm sculpting. So you can see that that's already a Sculptress Pro mesh, and probably later switch to Dynamesh once we get to a certain stage. And a few other things. Split unmasked points is something that I use a lot, and you'll see me use it later. I have the subdivide size at the top of my UI for the Sculptress Pro settings, just in case I want a heavier mesh with like more details. And yeah, I think that's it. Are there any questions about this, like the settings and stuff like that, before I move on?
No, the big question is, I know you mentioned it, willing to share your brushes and the material that you're using. Do you have them anywhere where they can download them, or?
I don't have them, but I can save them, yeah. I can save them and share them.
Okay.
No problem.
Yeah, if you're willing to do that, they would love to have them.
Sure. Okay.
Yep. Other than that, you can keep going.
Okay, cool. So, we're going to start from this and hopefully get to a fairly decent head by the end of this demo. So the first thing that I always think about when I'm sculpting, and it's something that I heard about a while back, is the skull. I started like really paying attention to the skull when I heard that Norman Rockwell said that his teacher made him draw skulls every day, like from different angles all the time, and apparently him and his friends did not like it very much, but learned a lot from it. So once I heard that, I remember at the same time 1024 came up with this male skull scan, which was available online for free, and this picture was attached to it. So I kept this picture for years, and I basically have it on my desktop, and I just keep drawing the skull every time there is a little bit of time at work or something. And I think it's a really great exercise to make you remember what the general shape of the skull is and what the main bony points of the skull are that make the face better. Because once you start sculpting different types of faces, you'll see that the skull is like the most important thing to get back to. And even if you're sculpting different ethnicities, that's even more important, because the difference between a European head and the Asian head is not just the eyes, it's also the shape of the skull. So I'm going to switch back to the basic material so you understand why in a moment. So the one of the most important things first that I look at are the eye, the front, basically the eye holes, and the top of the arches of the eyes, so the lateral part of the head. I'm thinking about this little plane here that's always visible, like a little triangle that happens here at the top of the head. That's something that I think is very important, and you can always see it once you start looking at the face from 3/4 view. The next thing is the frontal eminences, which is those little 2 bumps on the forehead. And especially when you're sculpting women, which is what I'm going to attempt here, you'll see that it's very often visible on the head. Another thing is the brow arches, the superciliary arches, this little part, which on men is especially prominent, but on women it's quite visible very often as well. And something that I would definitely suggest looking at when you're learning to sculpt heads is life casts of heads, and you can find them on Pinterest. You can find a lot of images of life casts, and when you look, for example, at Emma Watson here, you can see the superciliary arches are quite actually large on her head, so it's not just a masculine thing, although as you see on men it's quite visible. So definitely look at life casts if you can find some images, or even grab a life cast, preferably one that's made with a cast in plaster, because it's a more of a matte material, and they sometimes sell them cast in resin, which is very shiny, and it's not very good with lighting. So definitely get it if you can get one made of plaster, and you can buy them on eBay, for example, very easily. I would definitely recommend it. Mostly when you can light it from the top. So if I move my head and my light, one of the things that I always try to look at when I'm sculpting the orbital arches is when to have this area in the closer to the nose quite deep. And when you compare it with the life cast, when you look at the light casts that are lit from the top, you look at the depth and the shadows, it's quite deep. So it's a good thing to look at when you're looking at your references, and try to imitate this to get this depth. And depth is something that's very important. I'll be coming back to it a lot of times, and the shadows, and that's why I'm working with the lighting and the regular basic material rather than a matte cap. I'm using matte caps to just look at stuff from time to time, but I think looking at it with just the basic material is way more helpful. So apart from this area, the top of the brow and the frontal eminence, moving down the face, one of the most important things is the where the zygomatic bone meets the maxilla here. This sort of edge is very often when you see the cheekbone sticking out on the face. So from 3/4 view, you want to see it roughly at the same distance, like sticking out the same distance as the top of the brow on the outside. Unless you're sculpting the Asian face, where sometimes the brow area is actually more recessed, the overall face is flatter, so this part actually is more angled, and this goes in more on Asian faces. But when you're sculpting a Caucasian face or black face, more often than not, they're roughly at the same distance from each other. And now also the bottom of the eye hole is very important when you look at your face from the side and run a line, like a horizontal line through this point. It will also indicate the top of the ear hole. So I think it's called the Frankfurt horizontal. So it will indicate the ear hole, but it will also indicate like where roughly the muscles of the neck start. Although this is not exact, but it's quite close. So it's a good indicator where you put the bottom of the eye hole. And also remember to always look at where the widest point of your skull is. So the widest point of the skull is just behind the ear. It's roughly here. And the widest point of the face is just behind this area that I just indicated where the zygomatic bone is. So it will be roughly here. So it's something to keep in mind. And this is especially important for the size of the eyeballs. So I'm gonna actually put the eyeballs inside my holes here. The way I usually just do it for the personal project is I'll just append the sphere to my model. I'll just rotate it 90 degrees because I want this wireframe to be like this. It will be more useful for me. So I'm just going to scale it down. Usually in most anatomy books you can hear that the width of the face is like 5 eyes, and the eyeball is slightly smaller than the eye itself, so that will be like roughly 6 eyeballs. So what I normally would do is just grab this and just drag it out. 3, 4, I'm holding down control and dragging, so that duplicates it. 5 and 6, so that's obviously too big. Oops. Just gonna scale this. And I'm comparing it to the widest point of the skull, which is above the ears. And once I'm happy with that, I can just select one of them and do my split unmask points, which basically splits everything that's not masked from the rest, and I'll just delete all of those remaining eyeballs. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to do a little cornea sticking out, because obviously the eyeball is not round. Oh, I rotated it. It's not perfectly round, it's slightly curved, and I'm not too worried about it. I'm working with Sculptress Pro all the time, so I'll just smooth it out. I don't care about the geometry at all. And I can now place it in my... And I always look at it from the side, because I want once I think about the eyelid thickness and the eyelids, I want it to be like slightly in the middle of the nose. So I'll just rotate it out a bit. You have to remember that eyes are not staring like straight at you, but they're slightly rotated, otherwise the character will look like it's cross-eyed. So remember to slightly rotate it outwards. And I'm just going to duplicate this, mirror it. This is something I have also on my UI, the mirror function, and then merge the two down. So now they're one subtool. I'm gonna move them up to where my head is. Are there any questions so far?
Yes. So a couple questions that came through.
Cool.
When you're doing something like this, what do you usually start with? A sphere, or do you start with a head that you've already kind of got blocked out?
I usually start either with a sphere or the little anime head that comes with ZBrush. Because I like the shape of it. It already has ears and, yeah, rough indication of the neck, so it's easier to start with that.
And then for hardware, are you using a tablet or a Cintiq right now?
Right now I'm using a Cintiq.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the only difference between a tablet and a Cintiq that I found is that with a Cintiq you don't have to repeat your strokes because you just have more controlled stroke. So sometimes with a tablet you have to do like 2-3 strokes and undo them. But other than that, I really don't see much of a difference.
Okay. And then a question, you worked on Warcraft, the movie, right?
Yes.
Okay, so one question just came through. When you're doing something like that, are you guys starting from scratch and you're just building the org, or are you using some kind of scan data as well to start from?
I didn't work on the modeling part of the orgs. My job was to do blend shapes and muscle contractions and stuff like that, so I didn't model the orgs. But I know that they started from a base mesh. I don't know if the base mesh includes scan data. I'm guessing it might have, because it was like a general human base mesh. But I can't say anything more about that.
Okay. And then you use Sculptris Pro a lot, which you've mentioned you like a lot.
Yes.
Do you also integrate Dynamesh into your workflow with this? Or
yes.
you mostly Pro?
Yeah, I do integrate Dynamesh. I'm gonna jump to Dynamesh at one point because the thing is with Sculptris Pro, if you zoom out and smooth, a lot of the time you smooth out a lot of the detail. And obviously you can change the subdivide size, but that really makes the mesh heavier and heavier. So sometimes it's just better to jump into Dynamesh, and I have a tendency to keep destroying. You'll see it probably here too. I'll destroy a lot of the stuff that I already modeled. And to me, it's not a problem. I'll just destroy it and redo it again. And I'll keep going with the Sculptris Pro. But at one point, I'll jump into Dynamesh if I feel like I'm destroying too much and wasting my time. Yeah. Cool. So
I know you've been showing reference images. Do you have anything else like an crochet that you have on your desk that you use for reference, or any other things around your space besides the images you've been showing?
For reference, I have some skulls on my desk. So like I have these skulls from, what are they called? The bone clones? Bone clones. So these little ones that they have, which are like, they have male and female, like Asian, European, and African skulls. And I think they're 1/3 size. So I'm not sure if you can see them.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yeah, and I have like a male one, which I sort of drew some muscle attachments on. So it's a bit desecrated. But yeah, I have those. I have a couple of like animal skulls. I have the Anatomy Tools model, the big...
the male one?
The male one, yeah.
Yeah.
And always a pure ref scene with a lot of images. So I like to look at scan data if I have to. Like I sometimes will even load a scan model and just look at it as reference. And of course the live casts. I have a couple of live casts actually at home too. They're not next to me right now, but I do have like an older face with a lot of wrinkles. And I definitely recommend live casts. I find that live casts have more depth than scan data. It's something that I've learned in sculpture classes, and I'm going to show you later what I mean by depth even more, like other than the eye. So what I'll normally do is I'll just do this to start sculpting the eyelids. Yeah, but I have a feeling that the live casts have way more depth. Like somehow the scans look kind of flat to me. So obviously this looks ridiculous at this point, but yeah. That's a good start to get your eyelids in. I know that some artists also like to do, you can do like half a sphere on one side and the other side. I usually just brute force it. And an important thing when you're sculpting the eyes is to think about the thickness of the eyelids and think about the eyelids wrapping up around the eyeball. So you always need an eyeball in there, because otherwise it just ends up very flat looking. And you want the upper lid to stick out way more than the lower lid. So when you look, for example, at some references of people from the side, like from a profile, you'll notice that the upper lid sticks out way more, and the lower lid sort of goes inside and tucks inside under the upper lid, which makes sense when you think about eyes closing. But I know that very often when people start sculpting faces, they forget about this and they just like do this sort of connection on both sides, and it kind of looks strange. So another thing you want to think about is this plane that the eyelid has, where the tarsal plates are. So usually there is like something called the tarsal plates in the eyelids that creates this little ledge here. And you actually, when you look at photographs, you can see the thickness of the eyes. The eyes are not very thin, like the eyelids, they're not thin. And very often when you see some new artists, they're very thin, they're like super close to the eyeball and wrapping around the eyeball. So think about the thickness of the eyelid. So this is what I meant, like you see, if I zoom out, I start smoothing this and destroying the whole thing. So I have to restrain myself because I do that quite often. And another thing about the eyes is the angle. So the inner corner, like Lantieri, I think it is, in his book on sculpting, talks about the inner corner being always lower than the upper corner, which is not quite true. Like there are people who have the outer corner of the eye lower than the inner corner, but most of the time there is a bit of an angle, like I think it's 5-degree angle between the outer corner of the eye and the inner corner. So it's something to keep in mind. And one other thing which makes your character look better is the area above the eye where the brow bone is. So as I was saying, there is this brow bone here, and then the little triangle area here. That's where in women the eyebrow will be like a few millimeters higher than in men. So the eyebrow will be above this brow bone, whereas in men it will be straighter. And just under this brow bone you have fat here. Some people call it like a bean, especially in drawing classes. They say there's like a bean shape under the brow. And you have to remember this, because if you don't put it in there, the face looks very surprised. And it's also a common mistake. People don't put this fat in, and then the character looks like it's constantly surprised, because when we are surprised, we actually pull the muscles of the forehead up, and this whole area moves upwards and makes a hollow just above the eye. So if you leave that hollow on all the time, then yeah, your character will look surprised. So I'm just gonna indicate the brow. And once again, this is the sort of triangle that I'm trying to keep quite deep. Like I showed you on the live scans, you want there to be a shadow there at all times. And another area which is I think very important when you're thinking about depth is the lips. So usually when I just do the lips, I start with with a sharp brush and just gonna tone down the intensity slightly. I'm just gonna draw it in. Width-wise, it's going to be somewhere in where the iris starts. So my irises are way too small on this. I'm gonna change this slightly and just... Usually you have like 3 irises in the eyeball. So this is, yeah, that's better. And my lip corner will be roughly where the iris starts. And I'll just draw this in. So you want to remember that this line is always convex and not concave. Usually, very often you see in like people who are just starting, they have this sort of lip. And even if it appears like this in some images, in some references, it's because of the angle at which the photograph is taken. Just going to refine my... So as I was saying, the corner of the mouth and the middle part of the mouth is the deepest. So you again want to make sure that you see the shadow in there when you're sculpting them. So normally, yeah, that's the way I would do it, and I want this little ledge on the edge. And like one of the most important parts of the lips, around the lips, is the area just outside the corner, which is called the node. And that's where, I think it's 7, but don't quote me on this. I think it's 7 muscles of the face meet. So all the muscles that pull your lips up and pull your lips down, make you smile, make all the expressions, they all meet in one point. So you always have this thickening around the lips. I'm going to show it to you guys on those live casts again, so you can see what I'm talking about. Like you can see it here quite clearly. You can see it on her. You can see on Alicia Silverstone, it's quite like the depth is quite significant. So you always have like deeper area here and then deeper area in the middle of the mouth usually when you're looking at faces. And it's important because when you look at someone from a distance, when you're looking at your sculpt from a distance, you still want to see what you're looking at. I remember I took a class in like portrait sculpture at, it was a while back at the Grand Central Academy, and that was like the first thing that the sculptor that was teaching that class told me. It was like, you have to make this deep because I want to see it from the other side of the room. And I think that's like a biggest thing that I see between scans and live casts, is that lack of depth. And also very often in sculpts, I think it just looks better if you're enhancing that depth. So that's why I think the sculpting classes, even if you're not going to be a traditional sculptor, because I'm definitely not a traditional sculptor, I'm too heavy-handed, like I can totally destroy a sculpture with just one push. So, but it's still definitely useful thing to try. Now I'm sculpting a female here, so I'm wanting to move the lips quite and the nose quite closer together, so the area between the nose and the lips is smaller, the philtrum area, because in women it usually is smaller, though it's not a rule. Like there are some women that have it longer, but usually it's smaller, and it also indicates age. Like with age it sort of recedes down more, so you have more of a distance. So I'm just indicating the lips, and one thing you want also to do is have quite a deep area here. So once again, when you're looking from the top with the light from the top, which I constantly have, this creates quite a deep shadow. And very often when you start learning, and something I did for years actually, when you start learning sculpting heads, you look at the same things that you look at when you start learning to sculpt bodies. You look at the muscles. And I think it took me 10 years of learning to finally realize that the muscles are not the most important thing in faces. The muscles are only important when you start making facial expressions. But the one thing that's super important, other than the bones, the skull, is the fat on the muscles, on the bones. So the muscles are covered in fat pads, and I would definitely urge you guys to start looking at fat pads of the face, like look it up. And once you start looking at your reference and those images of the fat pads, like the anatomical images of the fat pads, you finally start realizing, oh my God, those are the areas that I see indicated on the face. So like the things, like for example, this malar fat pad, which is here. You finally start, especially if you're sculpting somebody older, you start recognizing the areas between the fat pads and start seeing where the fat is on the face. And I think more stuff will start making sense to you. And also, I think also it will make your faces look better. So I'm going to turn down the clay tubes. I usually like to work with it like very small, very lightly, and just build things up rather than be as heavy-handed as I am in clay.
So Magda, was there any system for you to help you remember all these landmarks and muscle structure and fat tissue that you're talking about? Or was it just pretty much sculpt, repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, just keep sculpting?
Just keep sculpting, rinse and repeat. Yeah, I think that's the only way to learn it and the only way to remember it. So one thing I would say, if you're just starting, don't bother with like remembering muscle names for the face or looking into a facial action coding system, because that's super technical stuff, which you won't use for a while. Unless you start making expressions, then you probably will need to remember some muscles. But what you need to remember is where they attach and not what the name is. I mean, the name will help you once you start working with facts, but if you're just starting, that's going to be quite a while yet. So concentrate on the bones. I would say practice the skull, and I'm not saying just sculpt the skull exactly as it is, like every detail, every little nook and cranny, but the overall shape of the skull, and try to see where those landmarks are on the reference that you're looking at on the face, and try to place the fat. So you have some fat here, which is the one that I was talking about earlier, so your character doesn't look too surprised. You have some under the eyes, like this area, and very often even in young people you see like slight puffiness here. And these fat pads are divided, and very often in the references, when you look at the reference, I'll have some reference here, for example. As you see, like from this reference to this reference, they're different shape. So you have to look at your character, at whom you're sculpting. If it's a real person that you're sculpting, look at them and try to figure out what you see, which line is which on their skin. If they're young, you won't see everything, but you'll still see indications of some of those fat pads. If somebody is older, as you can see, the fat will sort of diminish, it will get smaller, and it will start sliding down. So you'll see more areas in between, like lines in between, which indicate where those fat pads are. So it's easier to read. And usually with like I think at the age of 30 is when we're starting to see some of the fat pads like descending down. So you can see here it starts to create this little bulge around. This is where it starts for white people. With Asian and African American, or just African, the aging process is slightly different than on white skin because of the thickness of the skin. So you have to like really look at the person that you're sculpting to understand what's happening. But you can see like even on a young person, you can see the fat pad here, and on her I can actually see one little bulge under the skin. On her it's even clearer because she's a bit older. You can see all those lumps and bumps. So once you start understanding it, then you have like an oh my god moment, I hope. At least that's what I had. Like I was like totally shocked that I was looking at muscles and totally not even thinking about the fat for years.
Do you use any other references? Do you have any like books or anything that you say, hey, this is a go-to book for me that gave me an aha moment?
The thing that gave me an aha moment was actually a Scott Eaton class on faces, not facial expressions, but facial anatomy.
Yeah.
So that was my aha moment for two things: the size of the eyeball, because I was always making the eyes too big, and the fat. And it was like 10 years into sculpting faces, and all of a sudden.
So are you working up a reference right now? Are you just going, I'm just going to sculpt a female head right now? Do you have something in mind that you're doing right now, or are you just?
I'm just going without any particular reference. Like I have a lot of images of those live casts, and that's it. So I'm just like picking a bit from here and a bit from here. Right now she's looking funny, but yeah, we're not there yet. But yeah, for books, I would definitely say, like I have a list of books actually for you guys.
I'll get Scott Eaton's webpage and share it with them.
Yes, definitely. Scott Eaton's face anatomy is great. It's a great course. I actually took it twice.
You did?
Yeah, I did the face and the body. I was lucky enough we had him come to our studio. So that was the first time I heard all of that stuff. So I had to do the online course too, because I was like, oh my god, I need it again.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the go-to artists to definitely learn anatomy from. He's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And I definitely recommend this anatomy for sculptors. And if you really want to dig into faces and facial expressions, the anatomy of facial expressions, but this one is very facts heavy, like facial action coding system. But it does show the fat and what's happening during when the face is moving. So once you're confident with sculpting the face in like a default pose, I would definitely dive into this book more.
Would you be open to sharing your pure ref board too with them when you share your brushes? Are you open for that, or?
Yeah, I can save the pure ref board, sure. I don't know how we're gonna where we're gonna put it, but I can share it on social media and just give a link. You guys.
Yeah, I just put out Scott Eaton courses link for you guys. You should all see it in the chat right now.
Yeah, I don't actually know if he's doing like the facial anatomy like all the time, if it's constantly available, but definitely keep an eye out for that if you can.
He's got a summer session actually starting up next week, July 3rd.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, it's incredible to watch him work.
So yeah, let's get back to this thing because it's still far in the woods before we can make like an expression or something. So one thing I wanted to talk about also the nose, because right now it's just like a stuck on thing. One thing to remember about the nose is it's actually not glued onto the face, but it's part of the face, and very often you see this line running down the nose in many of like when people are just starting. So try to remember that there's a fall off here between the nose and the cheeks, and sort of merges with the cheeks. And for the nostrils, I'm going to just draw this in with my trusty sharp brush. The area between the nostril and here, you always want this little plane here. But one important thing is when you look at the nose from underneath, and this is actually an angle that you want to look at your model from quite a lot, and make sure that the eyes they have quite a nice arch. So when you look at it from underneath on the skull, and we're going back to the skull again, I'm just gonna show my skulls. You have this little bump at the base of the nose. You can see it here quite clearly. And when you look at the nose anatomy, you see how far it sticks out from the muzzle area, the bottom of the nose, and also the cartilages are on top of it. So that means that the base of the nose will be quite thick. It's not just a very thin line. Oops. I'm gonna draw the nostrils. This area will be quite thick, and then it thins out and thickens again. So the cartilage goes like this, and you have to accommodate for this bump. Move brush. So, and you want a plane here as well. So when you're looking from the side, you want this sort of flat plane here. That you see from the front. This is actually something that I did wrong as well for many years. I think it was Mohammed Modares who was like, "What's wrong with your nose base?" And after he said it a couple of times in the forums, I was like, oh my god, yeah, I'm so wrong. So I still remember it. That was the great thing about the forums. I still remember the critiques.
Do you do anything else to improve your skills besides just sculpting? Do you do like painting and drawing or anything like that, or are you just always sculpting?
I do some drawings, like I draw a lot, but I don't usually show it much because I'm not great at drawing. I just do it for like ideas and for myself. It goes into my drawer. So I have a sketchbook and I draw. I have a tendency to take a lot of like workshops and courses. Right now I just took one this weekend in painting. I don't intend to paint. I actually don't like painting much. Like I don't enjoy it. I like to draw, but I don't enjoy painting. I just get bored very quickly. So I don't see myself being a painter anytime soon. But I still learned a lot about like color application and values and shadows, stuff like that, and forms. So I think it's useful, even if you're not going to actually use it. I take courses like all the time. A lot of sculpture classes, a lot of 3D courses, yeah, and sculpting as much as I can. And both in clay and in, even though I'm not like sculpting in clay much lately. I had a moment when I was doing it way more than I am now. just need to add some depth to this because the eyeball, this thing is sticking out through the eyeballs. Oh, see, I knew this would happen. This is something that happens a lot on when I'm using Sculptress Pro on my computer.
Oh, when you switch the brush?
Yes, I crashed my ZBrush. So I'm gonna switch to Dynamesh. Thankfully, ZBrush saves everything. So it's there.
How do you approach topology? Are you going to show that in the stream near the end?
You mean like for personal projects? I don't really care. As long as I can put it in Substance, I usually would even Dynamesh it. Not Dynamesh it, but
ZBrush it?
Yeah, I would ZBrush it, and then I would oh my god, decimate it. So I would I would ZBrush it. I would unwrap it quickly with UV mapper, and then I would decimate it. So I would just export a fairly high-res mesh. Let me just save this just in case. And yeah, and export even directly from ZBrush. I would export the FBX file with my subtools when I'm going for example, like to Substance Painter.
Mm-hmm.
I would just do that. So I don't do like the retopology on personal projects. If I can avoid it, I'll just use ZBrush.
And then for your professional projects, for animation?
Usually there is a base mesh that we work with most of the time, if it's like a humanoid character. And if it's not, then yeah, I would just have to retopologize it in Maya probably. So one other thing is that I would like to say is definitely remember the ears. Like, don't leave them completely untouched. And they're not glued on the face. They stick out quite a lot, and very often you see them like very close to the head, which looks unnatural. And even in like pretty people, very often they stick out quite a lot because you have to still accommodate the hair in there. So don't be afraid to move them out. And I think it's actually Proco who has this really cool way of like to draw the ears that he talks about. Is just basically why do I have to do this? That's how I think about it. So it's a Y and another Y, and that's it. So it's just those two basic shapes, and then this Y inside, and that's your ear shape. So as you can see, that's what I was talking about. When you zoom out with Sculptress Pro, you tend to like the polygons get bigger, so sometimes you destroy what you did. I'm going to use a inflate brush, which I sometimes go to as well, but not a lot, just to give this ear a little bit of shape. But overall, I think ears are fairly simple to sculpt. They're not super complicated, and I think it really brings a lot to the face if you do sculpt them and don't leave them like totally barely touched, which you see quite a lot, even if the character has their ears showing, like the hair is not covering it. So this area usually goes inwards. And then this sticks out. Yeah, are there any questions?
Yeah, can you show your Sculptors Pro settings that you are using? I know you ripped one of the sliders out into your custom UI.
I have the default meshes, default settings. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's not doing anything secretive. She's just using default.
I'm just using default. That comes with the installation. That's the thing. Like I use the default on almost everything.
So since you started this with editing some of the alphas and you grabbed the alpha from Damon Standard, are there any other alphas that you find yourself using as a go-to besides obviously changing the settings you did in the beginning of the stream here? Is there any other alphas that you would point out for people to know about?
Not really. I don't use a lot of alphas. I'm not big on detailing stuff, like doing pore details. That's not. I don't like this. I don't find it fun. The one thing that I use a lot is lately is not alpha but brushes. I have Pablo's clay brushes.
Oh yeah.
Pablander's brushes. So I use those a lot towards the end. So I really like the knife. I think Gio was talking about this one a lot too. The knife sharp. And I like his rake brush. So those are like surface brushes for once I get far enough. And I love the clay layers brush also for like the effects that it gives you, like the clay effects. So I'm gonna go to Dynamesh, maybe sculpt that ear slightly more.
Do you come in at a perspective a lot when you're doing these, or you pretty much stay in perspective the whole time?
I stay in perspective most of the time. The way I set it in the scene, which I didn't do now, usually when I do the draw, I use 85 for like when I'm sculpting the head.
The focal length of 85?
Yeah. Or 50 if it's like with shoulders, once I get down to the shoulders. So 85 and 50, and full character lower, like 40 or something. But what I like to do is I like to go to Marmoset tool bag and just set a simple light in there. And what I'll do is I'll go to Z plugin, Subtool Master, and export, and I'll just like get rid of masking, have everything as a single poly group and export everything as a single file, because the Sculptors Pro mesh generally is not very high res. It's fairly low res. So what I'll do is I'll send it out to Marmoset toolbag from time to time with the light and the real camera in there, just to check it out, what it looks like with the camera outside ZBrush.
And I also just saved shared Pablo's digital clay pack that Magdalena brought
Sweet.
up. So it's in the chat for you guys all.
It's really awesome. And it also comes with like nice materials, so that he added to it. So I definitely recommend it.
Do you incorporate any poly painting at all when you're doing something like this?
Not
or do you
much.
stick to pretty much sculpt?
Just sculpt, yeah, most of the time. Sometimes I will do a little bit of poly painting if I have an idea that I wanted to test. But I don't do like, I know that some people like to put poly painting as fast as they can on their sculpts to just see it with like realistic skin color and stuff, but I don't do that. So how are we on time? Because I haven't even looked at, we're like 1 hour in?
You are, yeah, a little bit over, just over an hour and 5 minutes in.
Okay, cool. So you've probably seen this before, like those diagrams of the lips. You have like 3 little balls in here. and 2 on the lower lip. So that's what I'm trying to think about when I'm sculpting the lips. I'm not gonna go into a lot of details on them. So one thing that for the muscles, when we're talking about the muscles of the face, there's a couple of muscles that actually do influence the surface a bit, and you see them on some people. One is the muscle that draws the lip down, and it's here, and sometimes you see like a little thickening on some people around this area. Like you can see a clear division. And then another one is the one that draws the corner of your mouth down. So sometimes you see this line here as well. And I think it also the nasal muscles slightly, but the rest are covered with fat pads. So definitely fat is something you want to look into. So yeah, my process is basically fairly simple. Like I don't do a lot of customizations and fancy brushes. I just brute force everything. Just want to
somebody was asking if you 3D print any of your stuff off.
No.
That you do? No.
I want to. I would like to have a 3D printer, but maybe one day. There's priorities. Yeah, but I definitely want one. The only problem, I think, I would be worried that I would just get it, print one thing, and then stop printing anything. It would just stand there and collect dust. That's why I have
I would recommend anybody that's I would say this. If anybody's looking to get a 3D printer, I always say only get it if you plan to be printing like every week practically.
Yeah.
The printer's always working and doing something for you. Otherwise, you could just go to a lot of services that'll just print your stuff off for you.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can even upload your files now online. They'll give you quote prices right online with a lot of the services, so you can get a general price understanding.
So yeah, remember when you're sculpting ears that the back of the ears as well as the front? So there's sort of like a wedge between the ear and the rest of the skull. So you want a little bit of definition there, because as soon as you see your character from the back, you don't want like a mess in there. Although very often for like personal projects, I usually just like look at them. I'll see them from one angle. That's a camera angle. So sometimes I won't even, that's an inflate brush again. I won't even bother working on the back. I'll cheat. And yeah,
I might have missed. Somebody was asking, can you explain the 3 balls on the top of the lip and the 2 on the bottom? That's my question. I don't know if you brought something up and I missed it.
Yes, I did. So very often when you look at anatomy books of like how to sculpt, they'll talk about that the lip is basically like 2 pieces of clay that you would put at the bottom, on the bottom of the lip. So this lip has 2, and the upper lip has this middle one that sticks out, and then the 2 on the sides. So that's an easy way to remember how the lip is constructed. The ledge is way too thick on these. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I'm just waiting to see if they reply. What about hair? How do you sculpt hair?
Yeah, I was just gonna jump into that. So
hey, there we go. Look at that trick.
Perfect timing, because she's too bold. Yeah, so Usually I'll just grab a basic shape, so I'll grab a cube. For some reason I start with cubes most often. Just scale it down slightly. And just use the move brush with some symmetry at first. Just move it into place, and because I have the Sculptures Pro, I can instantly like adjust the shape from a distance. So I'm gonna make it asymmetrical. I'm gonna give her something. Obviously with the hair you want to look at some references for this and not just make something weird. Let me just look at something. Find a picture of the... I'm gonna give her a slight parting on the side. Not the move brush, but my clay tubes. And I guess I'm gonna use actually not the clay tubes, but the clay buildup. Oh, I'll use clay tubes and just change the intensity. So I like to think about it like, I think in drawing they always tell you, and this is why taking courses in drawing and painting and all that stuff comes in useful, because like with that ear, even though I don't draw ears every day, just thinking about the way they draw it comes in useful. And they say for hair, for drawing hair or painting hair, think about ribbons rather than like small strips of hair. Like think about like wider, bigger masses first. So this is what I would usually start with. And I like to blend the hair into the head, so I'll probably like sculpt a few hairs here and also like the hairline on the model, so it blends nicely. There's this French sculptor Antoine Houdon. He was an 18th... Oh, see, I forgot about Antoine Houdon, who was the 18th century sculptor, and he was a portrait sculptor. And I think when you look up his name, his sculptures of hair are amazing. Like I always looked up to him when it comes to hair sculpting, because it's super subtle. Like his hair is like, he doesn't put a lot of detail into it, and it always blends beautifully into the face. So it doesn't look like a wig or like a like you put a I don't know, like a cooking pan on top of the head or something. Like sometimes you have this feeling of like a cooking pot, you know, or a bucket on top of the head, which you don't want because it's not very flattering. And again, I'm gonna just adjust this. So yeah, that's the risk of my method of working, is the crushing.
Who was the artist you just said? They're asking if you could give the name again.
I'm gonna put it on here.
Okay. They want.
No.
Yeah, if you could type it out somewhere, that'd be good.
I think it's spelled correctly. Yeah, Houdon. He sculpted like there's a very famous bust of Lincoln at the Metropolitan Museum that he sculpted. But his sculptures of children, especially, he has a few sculptures of children. I'm not sure if they're his children. I think one is his daughter. The hair is like it's so beautiful. It's very, very subtle. Yeah, so usually that's what I'll do. And if you've seen some of them, so some of my like personal projects, I'll just dynamesh this, or very often even divide my Sculptress Pro mesh and grab one of Pablo's brushes, which again, like I said, my favorite is this clay layers one, which has a very interesting alpha, like you can see with little edges, strips. And I cannot use Sculptress Pro on subdivisions, but you see what it does? It like creates those little flat areas. This is like my favorite way of doing it lately, with this sort of clay effect that it gives. And for something a little bit more realistic, I'll just use sharp edges and like define some areas. I like to think about it like when you, again, think about the depth. So when you look at it with the basic material, you want it to create shadows in some places, like over the face, for example. I'm gonna use move brush and just move it out slightly, so it will, once I start rendering it or put it in a marmoset or something, it will create like a nice shadow on top, over the face. Now it's way heavier. That's something I do a lot of too. It's like I just go back to Sculptress Pro. Just sculpt. And I want to, another thing I like to do is I just like to turn on the poly paint on all of my meshes, so then they're all look the same. I don't have that darker mesh and the lighter selected one. So you don't actually have to have poly paint on it, you just turn it on. So I think it makes them all white. Slightly more. If there are any questions, you can hit me.
So yeah, there's one question about, for production, when you're in production, how much time do you usually get to work on the pieces that are assigned to you?
That depends on what it is. So if it's just like, if it's a hero character for video game, it can be a month. Sometimes it can be 2 weeks. Sometimes it can be 6 months. Like it really depends on what character it is and how many people have something to say about it. You know, like how many people are involved in the design of the character. And recently, my job consists mostly of actually just doing facial expressions and facts, based blend shapes or cartoon blend shapes. So I do a lot of stuff on other people's models as well as mine. And that can go on for months. It's like, it can, yeah, take 6 months or more on a task, and it's just basically interspersed with other tasks. So it really depends on what you're working on.
So for something like you're working on now, do you take your eyes any further? Like someone's asking, do you put holes in for your pupil, or do you just, what you have is you're like, that's good enough?
Very often what I'll do is I'll actually grab my clay tubes brush and make a hole I'll just make a hole in her head as well because it's not deep enough. I'll do this, and then I'll append. So right now it's too small. So one thing you don't want is, you don't want the top of the iris, the white of the eye above the iris to show, because that looks creepy. So you want part of the iris to be hidden by the upper eyelid. And at the bottom, usually the iris touches the eyelid. In some people, you can see the white of the eye below, but yeah, sometimes it looks kind of strange, so I like to put it like in between. And another thing I like to do is grab those eyes and I'll turn the symmetry off, and I'll just use the insert mesh, the insert primitives, and grab the cylinder and just put it in there. Just indicate where the eye specularity is, so the reflection in the eye.
Why the cylinder? Why not like the sphere?
I don't know. I just because it's a nice circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want it to be a circle from the front, and I still want it to go back quite a while. So once I have that, I'll just use the control and drag the other one, because you don't want them in symmetry. You don't want to symmetrize it. You want them both on the same side. So
how did you get started as a character artist? What was
how did I get started?
As a character artist.
Okay.
How did you...
I went to Vancouver Film School. That was the school I learned 3D at. And at first I thought I wanted to be an animator. So as soon as I started learning animation and tried the first one, and realized that I have to work with graphs, I hated it. So then I tried several other things, and we had a modeling class that we had to take, and I hated the modeling class up until we had a character to model. So then I was like, oh yes, I can do this. And after that, when I graduated, I was lucky enough to get a job instantly after graduation at Ubisoft in Montreal. I didn't actually get to work instantly because of visa problems, so I couldn't stay. I had to leave Canada, and I went to a small studio in Scotland where I got a job as a character artist, like a junior character artist. So I was basically doing like props for other people's character, and while I was there, Ubisoft was still trying to get me a visa, which is amazing. Like when I think about it now, like I was so lucky that they wanted to do that. And then yeah, after 6 months of working, being away from Canada after school, I got to go back to Montreal and worked as a character artist for Ubisoft Cinematic. They used to have a cinematic department which did basically commercials for their games. Then they closed it, and they started using Digic Pictures to make the trailers. But when I worked there, the first things were like first thing I would think was like a Tom Clancy game, a Total War or something like this. And right after that, I worked on the Assassin's Creed 1 trailer. So yeah, that's how I started. But I thought I wanted to be an animator until I tried animation, and then I was like, no.
Yeah, I'm the same.
I think a lot of people have that.
Yeah. So what would you recommend for somebody starting out? Because obviously a lot of character modeling positions are for people like you, senior artists. What would you recommend for someone that really would like to, in essence, follow in your footsteps and be a character artist?
I would say concentrate on getting characters really good. Like even one character, work on your anatomy and choose a good concept and make that concept really amazing. I actually know people who got their jobs, first jobs and really good jobs in the industry just based on one very good model. So it was very well modeled, very well textured. And don't try to invent your own character. Just pick a good concept from a good concept artist, ask their permission to use that concept. And yeah, and go from there. And just definitely work on anatomy. Sculpt as much as you can. And drawing helps. Even if you're not gonna be doing it, it helps to visualize things and you remember better. I find that when you're drawing things, you then remember them. You remember the shapes once you start sculpting. So that definitely helps too. Okay, I'm just gonna save this so it doesn't go away. And I think we can move on to a expression. We're gonna try.
Yeah, you're about an hour and a half in, so you know.
Okay. So
I also, for those that know too, I shared her ZBrush Central summary and her art station in the chat. Somebody was asking for it, so I shared it. So you guys should be able to get that as well.
Cool.
She's known as Intervane for those that may not know.
Yes.
Online.
Usually everywhere except for Instagram, because I made an account with that name and then I forgot the login, and then I just couldn't log back in. So now it's just my name, Magdalena Dadela with a dot in between for the Instagram. But if you want to follow like the stuff that I'm interested in, or I post a lot of sculpture stuff on Twitter and also a lot of useful links every time there's something new, some like 3D news and stuff like that. I usually like to post those. And yeah, everyone who follows me knows that I'm obsessed with sculpture, and I'll post a lot of names of sculptors from both modern ones, and so it's definitely useful to follow me on Twitter if you want to. I think you can see my link to my Twitter and to my Instagram on ArtStation though, so. Okay, so I'm gonna try and make this one smile. I'm not gonna do like a blend shape with properly moving stuff around, and because we don't have time for that. That will take probably forever without proper geometry as well. Like I'm not gonna go into ZRemeshing it. I'm just gonna brute force it. Usually with those projects, when I'm doing like facial expressions, I'll sculpt the expression instantly. I don't do like a base head. Sometimes I'll do like a basic head when I'm doing children, because children are really difficult to get the proportions right. But with a grown-up, I try to just brute force the expression. So in this model, I actually do have teeth in there. And these are the teeth that I've been using for years. It's basically just, I think it was based on, I don't even think it was actually based on a scan. It's just a simple teeth model that I keep reusing. And I'm gonna place them. So you want the upper teeth to roughly go to the bottom of the upper lip. Like when you touch on you look at on yourself, you can feel where the teeth end, like the upper tooth ends usually around the bottom of the upper lip. And for the width, The widest part of your teeth is usually like in the middle of the eye. You can see that in the mirror as well. Just mirror is another actually tool that's very useful, especially if you're making facial expressions. Just grab a mirror and look at what your face is doing. And once you start doing facial expressions, definitely look at muscles of the face and the anatomy of the face from that angle. So I'm gonna try to make her smile. When we're smiling, the first thing that happens is we're using a muscle here, which is the zygomatic muscle, which draws the lip corner to the bone, the zygomatic bone, but it's not like in the middle of the bone, it's on the outer edge of the zygomatic bone. So it's like a curtain, and you think about it as a curtain. This goes up, so it will displace all of this. And because you have a lot of fat here, all that fat will bulge out. So one thing to remember is the corners of the lips, the very corner slightly moves up, but when you're moving, the lips are moving a little bit up, but not much. Like when you look at pictures of a person that when they're smiling and when they're not smiling, if you can compare the two, actually very good, I'll give you a very good website name as well. I'm gonna type it in here. It's called Triple Gangers. And it's a scan store with a lot of scan data of faces, but they also have great images of the gray models of the same person with an expression and without an expression on. So when you look at the lip, like the upper lip, it doesn't really move up much from when it's smiling and when it's not smiling. It just moves a little. But the very corner does move. And what it's causing is it's deepening the area, the nasolabial fold, but it's not everywhere in the same amount. So the muscle goes up this way to the bone here, and this area here is like when you get the biggest amount of depth. So when you're looking at a person, this is where you see the hardest shadow, and then this part of the fat, which is like when you look at the face, this area here forms like a triangle, and the area, the part of the fat part that's closest to the nose moves least, and then this part moves more, so it creates a bit of an S curve. That you'll notice there's an S curve if you look at yourself when you're smiling. And from 3/4 view, this whole fat pad that's here is going to lift up and stick out way more. And because this lifts, it will create quite a bit of a hollow here around the eye area. So this will look more hollow, it will feel more hollow, and then you get this sort of a curve, another S curve that goes like this towards the eyelid and creates those wrinkles, the crow's feet wrinkles when we're smiling. And another thing that happens is the eyelid, the lower eyelid, starts moving upwards and bulging slightly when we're smiling. So you see it moves more on the outside. And this area here will get really deep because of that, because the eyelid will bulge out. And this shadow, like this depth here in the eyelid, is really what makes it look like the eyes are smiling rather than looking dead, combined with the wrinkles. So you have to really like make sure that you make it visible here, because otherwise it looks kind of dead. And also the nasolabial fold is not the same depth everywhere. So it like I said, it's going deep here, but here it's usually not super deep. It usually remains closer to what it was before in depth. The nose will also move slightly up and will get slightly wider. And the funny thing is about the nose, it sort of goes upwards, like it rotates a little bit. And I'm gonna lift this area slightly more. It's very often when you're smiling, like the more you smile, the more you have like this little wrinkle here. Generally, like I said, the shape of the upper lip is not changing much, but the shape of the lower lip, it stretches way more around the muzzle area, around the teeth. Oops. So I'm gonna try to open her mouth slightly without moving the jaw, so I'm not doing like a complete giant smile with the jaw open. Get to those teeth that I've put in there. I think I turned them off. Yeah. So because there is really no muscle like under the nose, there is a muscle on the side here that draws the lip up and goes up to the nose. So this area moves the least, and then this area moves a bit more and creates like this little rolled look. And I usually count to like 5 teeth, like the 5th tooth. Now it looks ridiculous. So it will flatten across the teeth, but the shape will remain fairly similar. And you have this sort of an S shape that the upper lip creates. So the corner sticks out more, and you have a bit of a S curve. And then on the lower lip, all of the area around the lip and around the chin will stretch and flatten. And all the muscles that are here, the muscles that I indicated before, they will stretch because the lip is going up. So you'll get this characteristic line. So yeah, I'm using the move brush a lot for this sort of stuff. And now because I'm still in like Sculptris Pro, I'm sort of just brute forcing it. Because I want to. Oh, another cool thing about ZBrush, when you're using the move brush, is if you use Alt, you can sort of make it go outwards with the normals. So that's something I like to do a lot too, to get the depth that I need. and thickness quickly. Are there any questions?
Oh, you've been landing a lot of them. One question came up. Where'd it go? About. I'm gonna find it again now. Oh, how now that you're doing expressions, is there any good method that you used to, or system to work out the striking parts of a persona? So I think probably just the parts of a person's face that really stands out in the expression. Is there anything in particular you do?
Do as in think
Any
about?
technique? Yeah, any technique or system, I guess what they're saying, what they're asking.
No.
I would say, if there's something unique feature on a person's face, and then they're going to now have an expression, what do you do to make sure that unique feature is still
Oh, it
present?
stays there. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then I'll use layers and make sure I don't destroy anything. I won't use Sculptris Pro and I won't smooth things out. Yeah, I'll use layers, and if I'm working on blend shapes, like I'll work on the lower subdivision levels, so I still keep everything that's on the higher subdivision levels intact or fairly intact. And yeah, and very often I work with Maya's blend shapes to do shapes as well, because one thing I can't get in ZBrush, for example, is I can't hide part of the mesh and move the slider, because it will instantly unhide it. So sometimes I want to see like how stuff moves inside the mouth as well. But for the details, I would say definitely if you're working with ZBrush, just make sure that you're working at the lowest subdivision levels, so you don't destroy your details. I completely I completely obliterated the shape of her lips right now. I don't remember what it looked like. But right now I'm just concentrating more to make something appealing rather than make it look like the character that I just made before. I just want to make a face that doesn't look too creepy. And that's something that's very easy to get with smiles, especially with children. I think one of the biggest things is this corner of the mouth. So the corner of the mouth moves up slightly and it indicates where the muscle is. Very often you have this line here that some people have, but the whole lip stays still fairly horizontal. So once you start dragging the corner, the part that moves up more towards the middle, it starts looking really creepy. So it's a fine balance to get it to not look too disastrous. And also,
do you sculpt likenesses often? How often do you sculpt any likenesses?
I don't do that much. No. Sometimes. And I would definitely, with the likeness, I would start with the profile and concentrate on the profile first to try to get the profile as close as I can to what it is on the real person, and measure more. So I find like points of reference, for example, the width of the eye of that person, and just use that as a point of reference for all the other areas of the face.
And when's the point when you break symmetry and start doing asymmetry? When's the point where you make that break?
So usually before I start, like the moment before I started sculpting this expression would be the moment when I would start like moving the nose to the side slightly, for example, like making it asymmetrical. Or I like to do like a little, very often if you just slightly move the corner of the lip up, like one corner of the lip up in opposition to the other, it just adds a lot of character to the face. Or like, I usually use leave the eyes as symmetrical as I can for as long as I can, because I find that it's easier this way. But the nose is something that I break very often, and the lips, because the lips are like, a lot of people have very asymmetrical lips, and it gives a lot of character to the person. So yeah, once I'm like roughly happy with the general shape of the face, I'll start breaking the symmetry. But still keep the eyes as symmetrical as I can for most of the time.
And again, for someone who was just asking to where her work's available, I'm going to share again in the chat links to her ArtStation and her ZBrush Central profile, where she puts a lot of her work. So you can link to that as well.
Yeah, and there's links to like Instagram there, so you can go there as well.
When do you come out of Sculptors Pro mode for you? When's the time where you're like, okay, I'm done with Sculptors Pro?
I'll be honest, like for personal projects, less and less. Like I like to keep it in Sculptors Pro as much as possible. And I'll just take it out as when I want, if I want to texture it. If I don't want to texture, if I want to just render, shade it in like Marmoset toolbag or something, I don't even bother. I just export everything as one subtool using the subtool master, and I'll just export it with the Sculptors Pro mesh. I'm not that concerned about it being Sculptors Pro. And as you see, I keep smoothing, and that's what I love about Sculptors Pro. It kind of feels like clay when you're smoothing things down. Like when you're sculpting with real clay, it has this, when you put a flame to it, it sort of melts slightly and melts all the features together. And yeah, that's one of my favorite things about Sculptors Pro, that it does that. So I'll just keep going over things over and over and smoothing them down and adding and smoothing them down, because I feel like this adds those irregularities, which are, they add a lot of character and a lot of personality to the model. I want this to be deeper and more wrapped around the mouth, so. And also the nose, it feels a bit too. Going to move this tip slightly to the side because it's more interesting.
So every day you're working professionally, obviously. How often are you doing your own personal work? So they can get a gauge of how often you're actually sculpting too.
Most of the time it's on the weekends, so like Saturdays and Sundays. Sometimes if I have a idea that I really like and I feel inspired, I'll work on it during the week as well, in the evenings for like an hour or two. When I was younger, when I was starting in the industry, I would do it basically every day for like 3 hours after work. I did it all the time. So yeah, I think it's with every artist, there is a moment when you're just obsessed and can't stop. And then, yeah, then it sort of diminishes for a while. And you just do other things as well that I think add to the inspiration. Like, I think learning other things than just sculpting is useful.
Yeah, that's why you're taking your other classes. You mentioned like painting classes and something else. Just
yeah. And
have a creative process, something different as well.
Yeah, exactly. Although, yeah, I don't really understand well, I understand burnout. Like, I have moments when I'm like really burned out and I just don't want to do anything, but I'll still look at art, or I'll read a book about something, related to the topic, or maybe not completely related. But the problem, like, I don't have a block in the sense of ideas. I have too many ideas, and I keep switching to new things all the time.
Right.
But I definitely, yeah, sometimes you just, after sculpting all the time, you just get really exhausted for a while and you just don't want to do it. I'm gonna make her chin rounder. Like, that's one difference between men and women. The female chin is slightly rounder than the male. So yeah, so the lips kind of end around here, but then the corner of the mouth, because it is pulled by this muscle here, it sort of is indicated on the skin, so it looks like the corner goes up way further than it actually does. And remember that the lower lip always goes under the upper lip.
You mostly just do human, right? You don't do too much animals.
I do animals as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lately, I've been doing way more animals than I used to. Yeah. Because I figured I need to learn more animal anatomy. So I have quite a bit of animals on my Instagram account. Oops. So this is.
Someone's asking. The bottom lip has a little fat next to the edge. Could you maybe elaborate on that?
It's not really fat. I mean, there is a fat pad on top of it as well, but it's called the node. Let me just find, actually, I think I have an image of, like, a proper anatomical image. So what happens is, so it's called a modiolus or a node, it's both. And basically what happens is a lot of muscles meet in the same area, because you have to draw your mouth up, down, backwards, depending on the expressions that you're making. So you need a lot of muscles there. Like this big muscle here underneath, which makes you do the little dimples when you're, like, the back, it's called the vaccinator, so it makes you have dimples. So what happens in a face which is without the expression, because right now I stretched it, you'll get like a little lumpy part that looks like a thicker corner of the mouth. Like it's just behind the corner of the mouth. So you see it here. On her it's very subtle because she's very young, so you don't really see much. She's very young too, but you can see it here. Yeah. This one as well. On the men you can see it even more.
So it's someone that's sitting at a desk for a long period of time. Someone's asking, what kind of chair do you have?
A very bad one, which I found out. I never felt it much because like 2 hours is okay. But once I started working from home now, during the COVID thing, I realized that I need a new one. The chair that I have is an IKEA chair.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Good chair goes up.
It's called something like that. It's like one of the most popular IKEA chairs. It's like
Herman Miller.
Yes, that's what I need, exactly.
Yeah. Herman Miller is probably the most popular chair that people get for sitting at a computer for a long time. I'm actually sitting on a Herman Miller myself right now.
Yeah, but Herman Miller is like $2,000.
Yeah, but you know what I did is I bought like a used one, in essence, in parts that someone goes and buys from going out of business, or they take parts from multiple of them and make one finished one.
Yeah, that's
what I would recommend, because you're right, there are thousands of dollars.
Yeah, they are very
But
expensive.
I will say for me, it definitely changed me, because I used to get a ton of back pain and a lot of pain in my tailbone, because I think it's because I'm tall, you know, and then I'm 225 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
And then when I
definitely.
switch to this chair, I don't get any pain, and I'll sit in this chair for 10 hours in a day.
Oh, you have the Aeron one?
The most popular one, I think it's an Air. I don't even remember now. Here, I'll see if I can find a link, since somebody was asking. So let me see if I can find a link for that.
Yeah, that's.
I'll give you the one that I'm sitting on, which is the popular one. I think it's called the Arrow one.
Yeah, that's definitely something I need to upgrade, because I really don't like the chair that I have, and it's only now that I started working from home and sitting at my computer. Because at work usually you get fairly decent chairs. I mean, in comparison to.
Yeah, it's worth it. You gotta think, right? It's like the vehicle of your body, really.
Yeah, it's
right?
more than worth it, actually.
Yeah.
It's
Here, I'm
unhealthy.
gonna put a link. And somebody was asking for a link. There's a link. Wow, it's a big link. This is the chair, kind of. Mine's old. Mine's like the old design.
Well,
But
as long
again,
as it works still.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long
But
as
I would recommend doing kind of like I did. Just find somebody on like an online site. I guarantee business go out of business, and then they just need to get rid of them. So they're willing to sell them to you for like $300, $400.
Yeah, that's exactly what I should do. Just hunt for one.
That's what I did. Obviously, like Craigslist here in the United States,
Yeah.
which I think they're in Canada, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
I'm sure actually now is a good time, because there's probably going to be a lot of people going out of business, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, I definitely need to upgrade, because the one I have is not good.
That, or I see a lot of digital artists now too, getting like the gaming chairs.
Oh
The
yeah,
gamers
are those
sitting in their chair for
actually,
8 hours.
Are those actually good? Like those
I've never
the ones that look like
I've-
a racing chair?
Yeah, I've never really sat one in for a long period of time, but they seem very common. I see a lot of people starting to use those as well. Somebody's putting some more chairs in there. It's become a topic now in the chat.
Cool. Yeah, I think we're like done, because I can go on forever just getting it better and better. Less and less creepy, but I guess you're getting the gist of the process. And I hope it was useful at least a little bit.
Yeah, I think you've inspired a lot of people and gave a lot of people some really good tips.
Cool.
Some subtle tips that make a face come to life, I think, and give life to a human face.
Yeah, I hope at least one person gets something, like a little aha moment from this, then I'll be happy.
Yeah, and again, this is all being recorded, so you guys, anybody can go rewatch Magdalena's stream. This will obviously be on our YouTube page forever, and then it's there forever, Magda. And it'll stay on our Twitch page for as long as videos can stay there. Based upon, we stream every single day on our channel, so those videos are daily being added. Sometimes 2 or 3 videos a day. So you can rewatch this again for sure. It'll be up here, be up in the pages immediately, or usually sometimes within the hour. It processes everything to get it completely up.
Cool.
Do you have any other places that people can reach out to that you'd like to share besides the 2 web pages, besides your ArtStation and ZBrush Central profile I shared? I know you said Instagram.
Oops, I would definitely say Instagram. That's Magdalena.Dadela. And Intervene on Twitter. Twitter is like the place where I'm most at, probably. Well, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to.
And then how do you want to share? You said you were going to share your brushes, your material, and then also your peer ref with those references and stuff. How would you like to share those? So they know
yeah, that's a good question. Well, I can upload it somewhere, but I'm not sure.
Like if you want, there's somewhere you want to upload it. I can also then put the link in the description of your video on YouTube as well, so when people go there, they can get it.
Yeah, I can do that.
If you want to do something like that to just make it easy.
Yeah, sure. I'll just make a zip file with all that stuff in.
That way people, yeah, you guys can all go there. We'll see about putting a link on the YouTube, since that video is always going to be there. It'll be the easiest spot for you all to remember.
Yeah, I
to
think
go
so, because otherwise we're going to just,
Yeah, otherwise it'll get lost probably in your social media, which is fine. You might get lost though when you start posting more and more over the year. So we'll do that. We'll work out with Magda to figure out how to get stuff from her, and then we'll post it in this video of hers on our Pixologic YouTube channel in the copy, the description.
Cool.
And somebody's sharing your Instagram right now and your ArtStation. All right. So Magda, this was awesome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for asking me to do this.
Of course.
That's awesome.
I'm glad this one went smooth for you. And
Yes.
Everything.
Almost. We crashed a couple of times.
Yeah, a couple of crashes, but at least the screen was good. Better than our first attempt, that's for sure.
Yes, exactly. No lightning strike.
And Magdalena is actually the end of season 2 for ZBrush Masters. So next week is the start of season 3, and our first artist for next week's ZBrush Masters, which again, they're every Tuesday, is going to be Thomas Littlebach. So he's an amazing jeweler, and he's going to be showing actually more than just jewelry. He's going to be showing very cool other ways that he's using ZBrush to do production for like clothing lines and things like that.
Wow, awesome.
And he's going to show an amazing way, the way he uses the history brush and all that. You guys want to check that out, because he's going to use that in the way really we hope that people would use it for production purposes as well. So you don't want to miss that. We'll be announcing all those upcoming season 3 this week later on. So just head to our web pages. We'll be having all over our Instagram, our social media as well, if you guys want to know the upcoming seasons. So, but Magdalena is the final one for season 2. But again, every Tuesday, we're doing these with an amazing artist like Magdalena every Tuesday.
Cool. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Yes. Yes, thank you again, Magda. Have a wonderful day. Everyone else, thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate watching our channel and our ZBrush Masters episodes.